Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today. I've got the Lowrider S from Harley-Davidson. I had the Sportster S before this and I thought I'd do a quick comparison between these two models because on the one side of things, I really love the Sportster S. I feel like that's the Harley that is kind of designed to me as a rider. However, jumping on the Lowrider S, I was blown away by just how good it is. And there are actually areas where I think this bike does eclipse the Sportster S, but obviously, you know, there's a lot of context that goes into that. Now, when we talk about the two models, the Sportster S is, of course, a lighter bike. It's 228 kilos. It's got the Revolution Max engine, and it is much more of kind of a performance machine in that while the power figures between the two machines are fairly similar, the Revolution Max actually offers less torque but has a much taller rev range and can be revved out a lot harder. So it's more of a performance machine in that regard. The Lowrider S has the Milwaukee-Eight 117. It is the top tier engine that we're now seeing in quite a few models in 2022. And it's essentially just the best engine you can get. Even the CVO engines are still the 117 as far as the offerings for 2022. And while this doesn't have the higher rev range, which for perhaps a more technologically inclined rider or someone who likes kind of the really sporty things, it doesn't have that really high rev range, but the torque is significantly higher than the Sportster S and it is available nice and low, which makes it a very, very usable machine. That does mean it doesn't have any of the electronics on this because it is the old style Harley, where the Sportster S offers a quite extensive electronics package, which is going to be a big boon to some people. Starting on the front end, this has got the dual disc brakes, and I would probably say the braking performance between the two machines is pretty similar. While this does have the dual disc brakes, it is also 70 kilos heavier, which I think kind of offsets that advantage. And the big disc brake on the rear, while it does offer good power, I wouldn't have said there's a significant difference in real world conditions with one rider on the bike, and particularly if you weigh, you know, similar to what I weigh, which is say 70 or 80 kilos in gear, as far as the braking performance between the two. What I did like was this taller front end because it actually offered good wind protection, where the Sportster S really doesn't have any wind protection at all with the lower front end. Also, where the Lowrider S comes out in front is it's got an almost 19-litre tank, where I think the Sportster S is 11.8 or so. So you're getting a significantly larger range out of this particular machine. And it's worth keeping in mind, I think the ergonomics and the suspension setup on the Lowrider S is a little bit more comfort inspired and aimed, which means this bike is going to be more comfortable in my mind for the longer rides. Now, perhaps on the Sportster S, which has the fully adjustable suspension, you can maybe adjust that to get a bit more comfort out of it. But I would say the Sportster S is the more sporty, as the name would suggest, inclined model and kind of much more performance based. So the comfort has taken a back seat. Both have the sculpted seats, but on the Lowrider S, it is significantly more comfortable and more padded, where on the Sportster S, it's a sportier seat. What also is a huge advantage on the Lowrider S is this huge rear guard. Now, obviously the styling between the two machines is totally different, but when it rains, if you are riding in the rain, which may not be the case, the Sportster S throws water all the way up your back, up to your helmet. On this, you don't have any issues like that, simply because it's got this huge guard on the rear. If we talk about the exhaust note, obviously the Lowrider S is the traditional Harley, and that is going to tick all the boxes for people who love that traditional V-twin. The Revolution Max is a much more technological engine. It's got a bit more of a twirl to it as far as how it sounds and everything like that. I would probably put them as a tie to me because I don't have, you know, a really heavy kind of loyalty to the traditional Harleys. I like both the bikes. I kind of see the strengths of both of them. And I do like the electronics package, which kind of gives the Sportster S some different characteristics depending on what settings you have. And certainly the cruise control on that is kind of a cool feature to see. Both bikes naturally offer that cruiser handling characteristic, although the taller, heavier front end setup on the Lowrider S somewhat offsets the additional wind protection that feature offers, while the Sportster S has a lower front end and a bit more aggressive a seating position as a result of that. The Sportster S with that wide rear tyre can also be a little resistant to steering at lower speeds, although that drops away as the speeds rise, where the Lowrider S is just the heavier front end to contend with and more relaxed and upright sitting position, which is in general terms a boon. Now, whether you like the taller bars will of course come down to the rider. Both bikes are more rear orientated with the handling characteristic, where you're aware of rolling across that rear tyre profile, but I thought the handling was great on both once onto decent roads. They'll carve up some decent twisties with ease, keeping in mind clearance issues, and are well supported on the brakes. The Sportster S saw me a little more inclined to carry more speed into corners as well as the brakes in, where on the Lowrider S I was braking more on the way in and carrying less speed. The easiest way to look at it is the Lowrider S has a definite advantage in being more comfortable and a little more stayed through the twisties, where the Sportster S is a bit more firmly sprung with good stability either way when it comes to going wide open throttle for some fun on the straights. Now, talking about kind of some more subjective areas, I do like the round headlight on this bike. I'm a bit more of a fan of that traditional style where the Sportster S has that long headlight, which is probably going to be a little bit more polarizing as to whether people like it or not. But in comparison, this has got those incandescent LEDs. I didn't quite find those levers quite as nice, and this also has a significantly heavier clutch lever and clutch pull than the Sportster S, which has the slip and assist clutch. And that's probably worth mentioning as well. The engine braking on this is significantly stronger and more noticeable, which you can use a little bit more actively without changing gears. On the Sportster S, I was knocking it down through the gears to take advantage of the slipper clutch and the engine braking to a greater extent. So final thoughts on the Lowrider S versus the Sportster S. I think I'd probably still go for the Sportster S. I like the tech included on that particular bike. I like the way it revs a little bit harder. It's got the VVT. It's got some really nice features, which I guess, while realistically speaking, the Milwaukee 117 is a very good matchup in many ways against that. Just the flexibility of the Sportster S and that level of technology is a little bit of a kind of a point which pushes it across the line for me. Not to mention the fact that the Sportster S I think is about $4,000 less than the Lowrider S, and so I'm a pretty value driven rider and I like that alongside, you know, the adjustable suspension and things like that. For looks, I'd probably say the Lowrider S is the winner there for me, but you know, obviously there's no Lowrider S with a Revolution Max engine in it, and I do think that these bikes are quite evenly matched despite being, you know, fairly different machines at the end of the day. The differences between the two machines are really what makes motorcycling interesting, because you can get some, you know, very, very good machines that have kind of gone their own way even within kind of the cruiser line at Harley-Davidson. Anyway, if you've got any questions at all about the Lowrider S or the Sportster S, let me know down below in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them as best I can, I guess you'd say. And as always, stay safe out there and thanks for watching. I'll be back soon. You can support the channel on Patreon.